I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call Adapting Dune. Adapting a film from a novel is a difficult challenge. Hundreds, if not thousands, of novels and short stories have been developed into film and television properties over the years, and while there have been quite a few successes, there have been some missteps as well. But what if those missteps were due to a published work being unadaptable? These stories are so detailed, fantastical, and cosmic that conveying the words on the page might not translate to the screen. On today's episode, we'll be taking a look at 3 adaptations from 3 very different creators of a work that has long been considered impossible to adapt: Dune. He who controls the spice controls the universe in what on paper should have been an absolutely perfect film. David Lynch directed, with creature effects by Carlo Rambaldi and an absolute banger of a score by Toto, 1984's Dune. Royal houses, desert planets, spice, you know the drill. The houses of Atreides and Harkonnen, or Harkonnen, battle it out for control of Dune in this 2000 miniseries directed by John Harrison for the Sci-Fi Channel. This is Frank Herbert's Dune from 2000. And during his pursuit to see his film adaptation of Dune come to life, Alejandro Jodorowsky enlisted the best of the best in Hollywood to collaborate on what he believed to be the film that would have altered existence as we know it. Based on the information in this documentary, he might have been right. This is 2013's Jodorowsky's Dune. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy. You know, even the movies that are really hard to get through actually make for some of the best discussion afterward.
Yeah, that totally. It's painful. The first 4 were painful. The last one was fucking awesome. I was so glad we sort of forced that one in.
I love that doc. I thought it was great.
But boy, oh boy, we're the other works, like it was rough. It was really rough. I am inside of that box the whole time I'm watching a bad movie, and thanks everybody, I guess, for sitting through that. I mean, it did make for a really interesting conversation. So.
I already thanked myself 3 times for watching each of these while I was going through those.
I'd like to thank myself.
Yeah. I'm so awesome.
A beginning is a very delicate time. The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster. With me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you very much. We are back today with another 3-picture discussion. This time, a very special one. We are talking about adaptations here, and probably one of the adaptations of the unadaptable, if you will, the very famous Frank Herbert novel from 1965, Dune. This is a very, very cool episode, and we also have a very special guest on today. Jeremy, if you could do the intro.
Yeah, the subject of Dune, like the book. You know, I had a copy for the longest time, and
I think we all did.
Never read it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I was finally getting into it recently and having discussions with it with a friend of mine, and you know, we had kind of talked about how hard it must be to adapt this thing film-wise. I had never seen any of the Dune movies or that miniseries thing
Before this,
yeah, or even the Jodorowsky Dune documentary. So I thought it would be great to try and hash all this out, and I thought what better way to do it than with my friend Daniel Ross.
Hey guys.
hey, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Daniel, are you the self-proclaimed, or is this Jeremy saying that you are the absolute Dune and Frank Herbert expert?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about that. Usually when you have a guest on it, it's somebody who's immersed in, you know, the literature and the sort of academic, research around a subject. But I'm a guy who's read Dune, and I've seen the film. I haven't even read the whole series, actually, just the first installment. I tried getting through Children of Dune, and it was difficult for me. Yeah.
I've only read the first book as well. I think we're all in the same boat then, right? The same boat with the book. We've only read the first one, at least at one point. I tried to listen to it again before this podcast. I just didn't have enough time to go through.
Oh, you didn't have like 48 hours?
Yeah, exactly. 50 straight hours of watching movies. So yeah, we're going through the adaptation by David Lynch, which came out in '84. Mm-hmm. The Frank Herbert's Dune, which was a 2000 miniseries on Sci-Fi, as well as 2000 minute series. It's a little long. And then Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a documentary about Alejandro Jodorowsky's 2-year crusade to make this into a film that would have, according to him, changed the entire planet and the entire way of thinking about cinema and your life.
You use crusade. I noticed they also use crusade in the Denis Villeneuve trailer. I think they've had to revise some of the terminology we have in our forthcoming.
Crusade, jihad, is that what you mean? Like those? Is that? Yeah.
Indeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What's funny is the idea of the Dune that was never made. Obviously, it seems a little like all these are kind of an odd man out, but I think most of this discussion is about like the challenges of adapting, Dune, the first book, and what that would entail. Like, it's such a long story for just even that first book. It's an interesting way to look at how they've done it so far. I mean, I know there's one that was supposed to come out this year and is now going to come out next year, maybe.
Right.
And we'll see what happens there. But this is an interesting time because it's on the cusp of the new one. I guess the trailer's been released, but there are versions that have been released so far. One that was never made, but went into a lot of excruciating detail of just his storyboards and all his casting choices.
And a hell of a coffee table book it was made from that that pursuit.
Yeah, where's the Taschen?
I want that thing.
$6,000 coffee table book.
Exactly. I'm going to say that thing's at least $1,000.
Man, that's they haven't done that.
Huge book.
Yeah. The book is more expensive than my coffee table. But also I think this is the first time we've had a documentary on the show, and I think it's also a sort of perfect episode to bring Daniel, to bring you on, because you're so immersed, in the documentary world. But I just to I guess kind of kick it off, part of this is I know we all read the book. I read it for the first time very recently. I mean, I think I finished the book, back in, I don't know, March or something like that. I mean, it was pretty recent. Although it is funny, watching some of it being realized in both the '84 and the 2000 Dune. I must have missed this detail in the beginning of the book, where the book itself is hard to get through. I think the first maybe 100 pages, because it distances the reader from what's happening. You're getting these little snatches and glimpses of this world that's being presented, but you're having a hard time getting your sea legs as to what's going on. And I think one of the details I missed, I mean, I must have, because they did it twice in the two adaptations that were realized, which is this sort of fleshy alien, goober monster that then takes them through interstellar travel.
Well, they said they never showed them, right? No one's ever seen a guild master or a navigation guide, right? They were just people that have been mutated over time due to inhaling spice vapors.
Yeah.
Right? So they've become these crazy... No one really knows what they look like. I don't think they've ever described them in the book.
In the first 5 minutes of the Lynch Dune, you see it, fully. I'm like, what the? Did I put in the right movie? What the fuck is this? And it was the Starship Troopers brain monster.
Yeah,
it was
Carlo Rambaldi, man.
Immediately confronted with a scrotum with a talking vagina.
With vapor coming out of them.
Yeah, and you're right, Carlo Rambaldi. It's you're right. That really was very much like, okay, he had just worked on Possession, and you can kind of see that here in this monster.
He just blew that monster up and then put it in a giant tank full of gas, as opposed to blood on the bed there. Yeah, but yeah, it's I mean, talking about these movies, I think either they both hit broad strokes, but like you said, this is dense material, and to get through all these, I think Villeneuve might be making the right or the better option as to making 2 movies, and I think he's only covering part of the book for this first film that's coming out next year or whenever it comes out. But
which
yeah,
kind of makes sense, because if they end it where Paul starts to get in with the Fremen,
yes,
and then in the book there's this like huge jump in time that was also a little disorienting when you're reading it.
Yeah.
But maybe it'll make sense, because the actor will have aged a couple of years in
Post-pandemic.
Naturally, yeah, before they can start filming again.
Yeah. And put on the pandemic 15. What's it called? The quarantine 15.
Yeah, and the hairline to go with it.
Yeah, exactly. To draw that back on, yeah.
So what? So you said you're part of documentary filmmaking. I don't mean to jump out of Dune for a second, but I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I have a background in public media, both on the production side and now on the marketing side. And so I work for an organization that produces documentaries for public television. I run the marketing team, trying to find audiences for all the great work that independent doc producers are doing across the country and throughout the world. So documentaries are where I spend, my headspace all week, and love getting to jump out into exercises like this, as painful as parts of it were.
Yeah, but the documentary was probably the least painful. I mean,
certainly, yeah.
What'd you think of that documentary? Yeah. I was a big fan.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, same here. I thought it was a nice sort of like combination video essay / just sort of like Wikipedia entry on the Jodorowsky failed attempt, and I think a fascinating character study. And maybe we're going out of order here, but
that's all right.
I think the sort of like cult figure I had imagined Jodorowsky to be, based on seeing, I've only seen The Holy Mountain, and of course anybody who's seen that would have to imagine he's essentially a cult leader.
Golden excrement.
Yeah.
He has all those qualities, and you hear him speak about his vision and the way that he assembled his team, first and foremost looking for these sort of like spiritual artistic warriors that he could assemble to attack this thing, and technical considerations not necessarily be damned, but like certainly the afterthought. I need somebody who buys in and is going to commit to this kind of enigmatic experience that I'm creating.
You had to believe it, right? You had to believe in what he was looking at, and
his rejection of, what was his name, Douglas Trumbull.
Trumbull, biggest VFX artist on the planet at the time. Yeah,
just a cold surgeon, Didn't have wouldn't go on.
But that's where he found it in O'Bannon. He found it in O'Bannon. This guy loves it.
So I didn't know a whole lot about the background, and honestly, like, absolute dream team. I mean, that team that he assembled, aside from some of the the actors that he was after, but man, I mean, O'Bannon, Giger, Mobius, just like absolute Pink Floyd. Hadn't heard of Magma. I'm gonna have to dip into their Spotify.
The visual and the soundtrack were gonna be fucking awesome, right? Like whether or not that was gonna be technically feasible. Dali was gonna be Padishah. And then
Wells.
The way that he brought that up too, he's like, the emperor needs to be, the Baron needs to be this big fat nasty person, Orson Welles.
I mean.
And at the time, they showed that picture of Orson Welles, and he was big man at that time. Big picture.
And you imagine the voice of Unicron being the Baron Harkonnen. It's just like,
I'm Unicron.
Oh, you mean not Ace Ventura's buddy in Ace Ventura 2? That version of the Baron Harkonnen? Now we're definitely jumping out of order.
Exactly. But also, just the absolute absurdity of how they constructed this production. I mean, the Orson Welles story where he goes to meet him in this, high-end restaurant, and he's got this, this is like absolute smorgasbord before him with 6 bottles of wine. Jodorowsky gets him, the finest bottle in the place. And the thing that sells him on joining the picture is, well, you could eat like this every day. This will be your craft services table. What could happen?
And that's everything that people were asking for. As long as they were warriors for this project, Jodorowsky's like, you can get it. You can have it. Everything.
Yes. I mean,
yes. But the passion that came from that guy was unreal.
Well, also like the movie seemed like it was like, going to be preordained to happen. It's like he kept running into his dream team. Happenstance, like the
yes, they were just
story,
there.
Wild.
The Dali story, like in the hotel room. Who else was there?
He's staying at the same hotel as I am. What?
Yeah, exactly.
Mobius at the publicist's office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like, what is going on?
The guy is blessed.
Yeah,
except
for that one last finish. Yeah, exactly.
So it was interesting. I mean, I know. While I was watching the documentary, I was like, well, they've got all this art done. They've got, the music picked out. I'm like, why haven't they made an animated or a graphic novel version of this with all the assets that they currently have? And it looks like he kind of pushed that into another Mobius Jodorowsky project with the that series he was working. And he was even pointing that stuff out. He actually got it out, and he was very happy that he could exercise that from his mind, right? That beyond the cosmos creativity that he's got. But at least he got it out a little bit. But I would still like to see that version of it, just to see the Baron, the way that he had the Baron drawn with like almost like drag makeup on, and it was like, I mean, just larger than life everything. And I just thought it looked really cool. I'd love to see that, especially with the music. And everyone had their own band. Pink Floyd was the Barons,
right? They had their own like sort of sound as well as the like the production design part of it too. Yeah, exactly.
Unreal,
right? Because like what's his name was sort of designing. Chris Foss was designing the sort of spaceships.
Beautiful.
What's his name? Mobius was designing the
costuming,
the Arrakis and whatever else, and Geiger was designing the Harkonnen.
Yeah.
And you'd have all these different contrasting different pieces to it. It's funny because it's like, for me, in the first couple minutes of the movie, he talks about how he wanted to take the audience on the experience of what it's like to have an LSD trip without actually taking a substance to make you hallucinate. And to me, I was like, okay, so it's more Holy Mountain. It's more like just the what have you. It's a little too much highfalutin out there ideas. But then you see kind of some of the ideas expressed throughout the rest of the thing, and there was something interesting to it. Who knows what the execution would have been like? But yeah, you're right. Imagining the dream team here, obviously, it puts in mind a lot of stuff that you think, oh man, that could have worked. And I think what's his name? I can never pronounce his name. It's like Nicholas Renfriend, whatever, the guy who did Drive. And,
yep, Nicholas Winding Refn.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
He, kind of floated that question out there of like, well, this is 1975. What if this came out and Star Wars never happened? And it kind of reminds me of this video essay that Josh Olson did for Trailers from Hell, the Joe Dante's website, where they watch all these movies, their trailers, and kind of have people talk about like why this film or that film that you probably never heard of should be seen. So Josh Olson did one on Sorcerer, which is the William Friedkin follow-up to The French Connection and The Exorcist, and the Roy Scheider follow-up to Jaws, right? It's like,
should be huge.
It's like, this is the hottest thing that could have been, like this dream team of creatives. Tangerine Dream to the score. The movie's amazing, but it came out, a week after Star Wars, and got
buried
lost in Star Wars wake. And Josh Olson said, "I like to think that somewhere there's an alternate universe where Sorcerer was a massive game-changing hit in Hollywood, and I'm doing a Trailers from Hell on the relatively unknown cult hit Star Wars." And in that world, Hollywood spent the next 30 years making smart, edgy movies for grown-ups. The literacy rate is 100%, and we haven't been in a war since Vietnam. And world hunger is just a memory. And that that like vision of things was kind of actually what this movie, the Jodorowsky's Dune, was kind of projecting. Cutting off Star Wars at the knees and adapting Dune into this, and bringing it to life on film in this way, which also would be kind of challenging, but also entertaining and an exciting spectacle. Again, who knows what it would have been, but it was like an amazing way to like imagine what that world would have been.
Right, and I think Jodorowsky is so charismatic and inspiring, and his ability to communicate his vision and the passion behind it, you can absolutely see why this dream team would assemble behind him.
Right.
He was not the person I thought he was going to be watching this at all, and he just seemed like such a warm, caring older gentleman that was just really passionate about his art, as opposed to the El Topo person.
Right. Like psychos he played on screen. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, he has that. I think of it as an Argentinian accent, but it's I guess Uruguayan and Chilean as well. But like that sort of deep South America accent that there is something that, I don't know. It's just the quality of his voice, like the way he expresses his ideas, and like he kept switching from English to Spanish to French, and he just was on a roll. And yeah, you're right. Like there's something that's like so charismatic about his like sharing his dreams, and getting people to also be inspired and join him on this quest to like make this thing.
Yeah, quixotic. He's really tilting at the windmills with it. Because he says he's like, I want to mutate the minds of young people, and I mean he has this really intense ambition behind this picture, this sort of like universe changing. He's taking this source material that is about collective consciousness and the sort of like danger of that, and kind of attempting something similar through this motion picture that he had as a dream in his head, which was fascinating.
And it was definitely his version of it too. He was going to end it completely different than what any of these versions, as well as the book, how they were going to end it. I mean, at this point, he was going to take Arrakis and send it through the cosmos. It was like this entirely different. Like Arrakis became the the Muad'Dib or the Mati or the Kwisatz Haderach, depending on which one you're going to look at. Yep. But I mean, that was like his version of it. And I'm sure that, again, the execution wouldn't have been as cool as the concept. And I think the concept is really awesome, but, I don't think that being executed, anyone, especially fans of the book, would be like, huh?
Right. When they got to that part of the documentary, it was like, oh, chapter 12, the death of Paul. And you're like, what, the death of Paul?
Again, which book?
We're not getting another movie?
Did I miss a chapter?
To go back to some of the casting that he was doing and like the saying yes to everybody, that the Dali situation was really interesting because he wanted to be the highest paid actor in Hollywood history. And he literally asked for $100,000 per hour. And Jodorowsky's like, no, I'll give you $100,000 per minute. But he put him in for 3 minutes. He wrote him. He's like, perfect.
Yeah.
It's definitely how I'll be entering my next performance review at work.
Yeah.
I actually think it's good that we started with this, because technically this movie would have preceded these movies. And this movie ends with Jodorowsky coming out and saying, okay, and then David Lynch, who I respect so much, actually got a chance to make this into a movie, and I didn't want to go see it, and finally my son's like, we need to go see this, and I saw it, and it was terrible, and it was wonderful. That was like, great.
Perfect, because it was terrible.
And the way he tells the story is like, slowly, I'm realizing this thing is absolute dog shit. And the joy that's welling up inside of him, and he admits it's a very human response. It's not necessarily something he is proud of, but he's totally open about it. Just quickly back to the ending. I was thinking about that too, and I think maybe conceptually or thematically, Herbert's sort of vision of absolute power and its kind of like decadence and degradation into horror is, over the course of the books, perhaps a more interesting concept to explore, but maybe not something as cinematic as Jodorowsky's solution, which I thought was a pretty elegant way to wrap this up in a single film. Like it is a pretty. It has an unexpected ending that isn't. It sort of walks this tightrope between like pulling the rug out from under the audience,
right,
and giving them kind of this satisfying, sort of hopeful vision to kind of project into the future beyond the credits.
Right, and it actually it gets to the vision that Paul, as whatever the Kwisatz Haderach or whatever, like has, which is to transform this whole thing and obliterate this empire, right? And that's essentially what the Jodorowsky version was doing, but kind of in more of a Jesus metaphor, and they have the I am Spartacus moment at the end where it's like I am Muad'Dib, or whatever what do you say? I am Paul, yeah. And it's true, like if you're doing it as a single movie and not as a I can't remember what it's called now, but like the start of the franchise, let's have an endless cinematic universe of Dune. If you do it as a single one-off thing, well then you do change those details. It's like I know a couple weeks ago, Danny, we were talking about LA Confidential and how they changed the book from the book to the movie, and to me, like, the book is unadaptable in a lot of ways, and they cut out a lot of those details, but they made a successful movie out of it that like stayed true to what the book was trying to get at, and some of the scenes that the book had. It's just they had different paths to get to some of those scenes, and it sounded like that's kind of what Jodorowsky was planning on doing with this film, which is that like you take the essence of what Herbert was doing in Dune, and you'd hit certain beats, but you'd take it a different way. It's like, okay, I mean, the Duke Leto dies in Dune the book, and he dies in Jodorowsky's Dune as well, at the hands of the Harkonnen, but it happens a lot differently, like, Paul is conceived, in a way that wasn't, meant to be
in immaculate conception in his version.
And he was conceived in a totally different way in Jodorowsky's version. It's a different type of conception, which is the thing that they have in common. But like the details of how he was conceived is different in both. But yeah, that's part of the thing. It's like that is the adaptation. But if it sticks to what the essence of what the story was trying to get at, or like some of these themes, but comes at it a different way, it's still a faithful adaptation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you add the dismemberment and castration and all of that as well, it's still in line.
Il castrati Duke Leto. That's certainly raised an eyebrow. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
And the costume as well.
Right. Yeah. And who was going to play Duke Leto?
Wasn't it
David Carradine?
David Carradine, that's right. Kung Fu. That's
right.
And Mick Jagger was going to be Fade Rotha.
which is interesting because it's like,
we have Sting.
Right. Right. And we've all seen some movies with Mick Jagger in it, and as much as you love him on stage and you love his music.
Was that Free Jack? You guys are going to love that one. We'll definitely come up with a block to watch Free Jack.
He would definitely have some good strutting scenes.
I think I'm going to be sick that week. I might not be able to make it.
We'll get a sub.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to hit on with Jodorowsky's before we move on to Lynch's adaptation?
Well, just one other thing is like, perhaps this makes more sense to tie into the end, but it is part of what they touched on in Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary, which is like some of the stuff when he brought on Dan O'Bannon, I was like I was like having all of a sudden like light bulbs were coming on. I was like, oh my god, I totally forgot about that because when I was in school, Dan O'Bannon was one of my professors for a semester, and Andy and I got to know him, and we would run to his house, and we met his wife who was in the movie, he was telling us about how the concepts for Alien kind of came out of these situations with Dune and Geiger, and how it came out of like Dark Star and all this, and I had just totally forgotten the Dune connection part of it. I remember it, him telling us all these stories about Alien, because Alien's so iconic, and the look of it, and the very Geigerness of the ship and the alien itself and whatever else. But I'd totally forgotten the Dune connection, and watching this movie, when they cut to the very first tip of the Dark Star spaceship, just the very tip of it, I was like, oh my god, Dark Star, and it just hit me how much of this oh my god, Dan O'Bannon, the whole thing just came rushing in right before the film got to it, and I'd totally forgotten about all that stuff that they do so well in the documentary, kind of explaining how it went from Dark Star to coming in to do Dune crashed and burned, and then it was
right to Alien,
risen out of the ashes into Alien, and then there's so many other elements they dive into in the documentary about how this influenced other films that we've all seen 100 times now, but would have been groundbreaking at the time because it would have never been seen before.
Yeah, I think the sort of poetry and beauty of that kind of lost cause ending up as this sort of text that has pervaded Hollywood since, and so many tropes that we take for granted, and then just little details that are hidden in plain sight, like the shots in Prometheus of the Harkonnen castle as mountaintops.
Yeah, and that Harkonnen castle, the back of the Harkonnen head was one of the things that Dan kept citing as the inspiration for Alien, right? It's part of that drawing and part of that thing, these conversations with Giger or whatever, that picture was one of those things too, where it's just I was just going through the Stargate, watching that scene. I was like, oh my god, I forgot about all this stuff. It was all coming back to me. It's so nuts. Anyway.
I would have really loved to have seen a Giger created Giedi Prime in a movie. I think that would have been the most, because the Giedi Prime in Lynch's is very dark. It's black. It's covered in pollution or whatever the hell else it is. But it just didn't have that kind of real lived in area. The pathway to walk up to the castle didn't have traps that would get set and these spikes would come out. It was everything was violent and nasty on that planet, and it really set up who the Harkonnen are, or the Harkonnen, depending on what movie you're watching.
Right. We'll get to that.
What's funny is I always thought it was Harkonnen, and
I think it is Harkonnen.
That's how Herbert pronounced it. But then all the or at least the two movies we watched pronounce it Harkonnen or whatever.
They did it in Frank Herbert in the sci-fi Dune. They called it the Harkonnen. It's just for Lynch's movie, it felt very much like he really wanted them to say Harkonnen, and everyone specifically called it Harkonnen. Well, I guess don't ask the author, huh? Just do your own thing.
Which is funny because in the '84 Dune, the very beginning feels sort of very accurate to what was depicted in the book. There's a lot of scenes that are sort of each word of dialogue is just cut straight out of the book, put into the odd voiceover. That is what happens in the book, but that's one of those things where making the adaptation, having that voiceover come in from every character's perspective, and sort of just having no perspective,
whispering
you
too.
Really see, you really
it's
see
really
how,
hard to take.
Some of those,
after a while, it gets a little grating, right? Because you're who's talking now? Because everyone whispers pretty much the same, and then all of a sudden, someone's whispering like this.
Yeah,
who the hell was that?
Is someone saying that, or am I?
You have to turn the subtitles on to really.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a way to watch this movie.
Yeah.
No, but it's that is one of those things where it's we were talking about the adaptation a minute ago, and that is what you would think would make the most sense. Okay, well, how do we convey what they conveyed in the book, which is like, Paul was wondering about this and thinking about that. Oh, we'll just do voiceover, right? But you see how it doesn't work when you have it be that literal.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to kind of getting at the essence of something and like adapting it for the medium that you're watching it in.
Right.
But you're right, they did nail the Gom Jabbar and the pain box and all that. Like, I thought that was pulled right from the pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and watching these sort of 4, hour and a half long, like 3 parts of the Dune miniseries and the Dune 1984 film, it really reminded me of the Gom Jabbar scene where it's like, he puts his hand in the box and, what's her name was really surprised that no human-born woman has ever experienced this much pain. And I was like, yeah, I know what that feels like. I'm watching all 4 of these Dunes in a row.
Yeah, that was the joke that occurred to me too.
Yeah.
You guys had
Wind
your
that one up,
Jabbar test up to my neck, and if I turned off, particularly the sci-fi series, I would die. You'd find out I was an animal after all, not a human.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess subconsciously that's what got me through it all too, and the fact that we had to do the podcast today.
Yes. So my thought on that is, I wish I could go back in time and watch specifically the David Lynch adaptation without having read the book, because having read the book and understanding what's happening, I feel like as annoying as that voiceover is, just sort of from a craft perspective, like I don't have the experience of somebody who I imagine would be just utterly lost if they didn't have the source material in the back of their head to navigate what's going on, even with the sort of stilted VO to help guide you through the plot.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like, I think I mentioned this to you, Brian, that in the Dune miniseries, so there's 3 parts to it, and like in the 3rd part, I finally felt like the scenes were starting to make sense from scene to scene, and like what the characters were talking about, how those things that they were talking about like related to what they were feeling, how that was like impacting what their next action was going to be. I felt like you had enough context in that 3rd one, but for some reason in the first 2 episodes, I felt myself like, even though I knew what the story was and they were pretty faithful to the beats of the story, I felt myself like being really lost. The opposite, I feel like, was true in the 84 Lynch Dune, where it's like the first call it half an hour or so, I felt like I was like understanding. I was like, oh, why does this movie have such a bad reputation? Like, I'm following along here, and then they get into the fast forward mode, where it's just like all of a sudden, like, we see these scenes that we recognize from the book, but like we have no context for what's happening. It's just like it's like just being blasted into your face, and like you're just like lost. You're like, okay, well, I guess that's happening now.
I feel like, if anything, his movie is like a summary of the book, and you're just getting like, it's almost like Alex Delarge sitting there taking the Clockwork Orange shit, just like all the Dune information you can.
And you're having the exact same reaction that he's having.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Ludwig van.
The second you see sand, you fucking you lose your fucking mind.
Yeah, I tend to have that experience, when I watch an adaptation of particularly genre fiction. Like, what comes to mind for me is The Lord of the Rings, which really feels like they really have those marks that they want to hit in the plot, and they do a good job of pacing it and weaving the world so that there's both room to breathe, but also a steady rhythm. Whereas in the Lynch adaptation, which probably because he lost control, who knows, right? But everything felt jammed together, and it was just sort of like a bunch of pieces that they had on the floor, and they sort of put them together as best they could, but the tears were still there, and so each time you landed on a new piece, you really felt some kind of psychic
of
jarring.
Puzzle pieces interlocking, it was just tape holding it up, and you're like, that's not working.
They're all squares. They just
and again, having read the book, what's going on. You're like, all right, this is that scene, or okay, here, and this is what's coming next. But for the viewer who is coming in cold, I really feel like, particularly once sort of Leto's palace falls and they're cast into the desert, like at that point you're just of completely at the mercy of this film with no bearings. Which
kind of makes sense for what we were talking about earlier with Villeneuve's, because that would be about the time when Paul and Lady Jessica make their way to the Siege and they meet the Fremen, and that's kind of, I think, where this version's going to end. So hopefully he can tell enough information in 2 hours that he's got up to that point that he can make a whole nother movie and complete the story properly. But there still is quite a lot of info that he's got to pack into a couple movies.
Right. No, it's true. And, that part in particular, like, I definitely felt that. And that is exactly where it was, Danny, that we were talking about, where it's like it started to sort of lose that connection with the audience and with the storytelling, where it's like, you understood what was happening with the hand in the box and the needle to the neck, and you understood what was happening with what's his name from Das Boot, Jürgen Prochnow, and everything sort of like leading up to getting to the Arrakis, and even the like scene where they fly over and see the spice mill or whatever getting eaten up, and he saves the workers there and pulls them out of there. Like even all that was still working for me pretty well, like because I special effects, like whatever, but the storytelling was still in line, and you were still able to follow it as the audience.
Damn the spice. Get him out of there.
Yeah.
This Duke loves people over spice. I like this Duke.
I like this.
Wasn't that Max von Sydow?
Max von Sydow, the cast.
Dr. Kine?
We have to talk about Max von Sydow, Brad Dourif,
Jose Ferrer.
Brad Dourif was awesome. I'd like to see more Piter in that movie, but he's got to get the tooth.
Me too.
He took the tooth to the face there.
Sean Young.
Sean Young.
I was like, what? She was in this? I had no idea.
Tell me about your homeworld, Usul.
And okay, we're on the cat. I'll stick with the cat. And Kyle MacLachlan, who is just terrible. I mean, one thing that I think is consistent about all of these adaptations, but in particular Lynch and sci-fi, is just how irritating Paul is in the way that it's at opposite ends of the spectrum. You have this sort of overly boyish Kyle MacLachlan interpretation, and then you just have the irritating, spiteful, sarcastic, condescending,
Abercrombie and Fitch model. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just and to an extent in the book, he's certainly written with those elements. I don't particularly find Paul a admirable protagonist, even in his personality. Right, he's a bit irritating in the book. So I think that's in there, but they really went to either end of the spectrum.
Right, but
in these two adaptations,
they didn't do in either of those two, the sci-fi or Lynch Dune. They didn't do that thing that you need to with having a difficult character like that. Of when Paul, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. When he first meets the Fremen and he gets challenged,
Jameis.
He kills Jameis, right? Exactly, and he doesn't want to do it. He's like, hey, are you going to yield and blah, blah. And then you see him go through with it. You see how he's an outcast there for having killed this guy. And, in the book, he expresses himself honestly, and then his honest expression is to cry about it, which to these people who value all, human bodily fluids, this is a sign of great respect, right? Mm-hmm. And that part of it, even though they technically had those moments in the sci-fi version, they totally cut it out of the Lynch one, and he's just instantly the leader for no reason. But in the sci-fi one, they technically had those pieces in there, but they didn't connect the dots of well, why is this important, and how is he showing the prophecy coming true about he knows all their ways and what all this kind of stuff and some of those things, the immense world building of understanding the Fremen and what the Fremen are looking for and what the Fremen respond to, how they have this underground society and all that stuff, that is tough. There's a lot of stuff to unpack there. And even in a movie that goes on for, it was 5 hours, the sci-fi miniseries. Mm-hmm. even in that, like, they kept forgetting to like explain those details, and it kind of makes you, with at least let's say the first couple seasons, kind of makes you appreciate the work they did in the world building of like the early seasons of Game of Thrones, where it's like, you would understand like what it means to have this house or that house, and the rebellion and like all these things that were happening. Whereas like here, they had all the time in the world in the sci-fi version, but like they would like leave out those details. When the characters were speaking the dialogue that came directly from the book, you were missing all the context of the book. And so therefore you'd still be lost in any given scene. I think up until the sort of the very end, where it's like you kind of knew what was happening just sort of inherently. But yeah, it is tough. And it's like, back to the Lynch one, we get him sort of fast forwarding through his, being accepted as like the chosen one. We get to the very end there, and it's like, like the little girl, like, kills the bear.
Why
and it's
don't you tell them who I really am?
Exactly. You're just like, even having read the book so recently, I remember like still kind of being lost, because like I watched this one first, and I was like, oh, that's right. And every moment that was like happening like that, I was like, oh yeah, that's what that was supposed to be. But you could tell that it just wasn't working on screen, because you were missing all this like context to like give the things that they were doing any weight.
One of the things that I think was pretty successful with the Lynch adaptation is something that actually they talk about in the Jodorowsky documentary. It may have been Jodorowsky himself, I can't remember, but they really tap into the sort of enigmatic quality of the book, and that part of it, particularly the first act of the David Lynch adaptation, he really does succeed in creating a world where you have trouble kind of wrapping your head around it, just like you were pointing out, Jeremy, in the book. There's just enough information that you can follow along, but there's this wider world that you don't quite understand. And the vibes really were sort of, Lynch's vibe overall is like perfect for that, because he has that expressionistic, nightmarish vision. And I think, the novel itself has, even though they're sort of different in their aesthetic, there is that kind of like dark, nightmarish quality to Frank Herbert's vision that pervades everything. It really is dystopian in a way that isn't sort of like, stereotypical, like post sort of nuclear disaster or whatever. It is dystopian in kind of quality of life and political economy. And there's something about the Lynch world that really taps into that. And then it sort of flutters away, like scattered by the desert storms of Arrakis in their effort to wrap it all up, right? But
yeah, exactly. To cram, whatever that is, 600 pages into the last hour of the movie. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And like, but you're right. Like, it seems like before the movie's made, and you see the cast on paper, you see Lynch, and you think, oh yeah, this is gonna be a perfect marriage of like Lynch's aesthetic capabilities. Yeah, you're right. The way he can like penetrate and see into the darkness through all of the sort of like shine and glimmer, like the opening shot of Blue Velvet, right? It's like, oh, here's the happy American white picket fence and the red roses and the blue sky and ground full of beetles. And it's just like it's like disgusting, like monster hiding just beneath this thing, right? And you see that like the off kilter way he's able to portray these worlds, and I think there was a lot of stuff that was actually pretty successful in the '84 one that then got lost in the next one, which even from like the idea of the still suits, right? Like okay, perhaps they had more budget for the costumes or whatever,
but that's what I thought a still suit would look like when I read it.
Exactly.
Functional,
like all
and
those little like
pockets,
pouches, and all the stuff, and like he's like, it makes sense that it is it's complicated enough where Max von Sydow would be surprised that he could do it himself.
Oh, you've put on a still suit before. This is the way that the Fremen do it.
Wearing the mocap jumpsuit that they had in the sci-fi version, it's like you could see how they, and okay, that's a budgetary thing or whatever, but like it's like, well, then you got to cut that line, man. It's like it doesn't work.
No, I thought a lot of the visuals and the set pieces and stuff in Lynch's movie were incredible, especially when right at the beginning when you're in the Emperor's palace. And when the spacing guild come in that first scene, I thought that was like larger than life, real like robotic and animatronic things, and the place was completely made of gold. Even the machines were all like gold, and it was very cool. And yeah, I think that did have to do with double the budget. I believe it was $40 million in '84 for the budget in for Lynch's film. Of course, he only made $30 million back, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Before advertising.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And what is it? What are they called? Like they would always like refer to them as witches or whatever. The
Bene Gesserit.
Bene Gesserit. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Like the look of the Bene Gesserit in the Lynch Dune, what was just so interesting with their hairless look and like the black and gold, dresses and whatever. And, so that kind of stuff you can really appreciate about this version of Dune, where it's like the aesthetics of it. I mean, I like the disgusting Baron Harkonnen, zit popping scenes or whatever. Like,
God.
Maybe those aesthetic choices weren't so hot. Maybe Fade, Sting Fade coming out of the sauna or whatever with his like little codpiece on, and
but with the killer score going on behind it though, right? Yeah. That wasn't that Tangerine Dream that did that. I mean that
Toto.
Oh, Toto. Sorry, that just rocked. Like when you're rewatching it, these big like riffs on the guitar. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, and Eno did the dream sequence music. Really, again.
Actually, those dream sequences were I mean, like
they were awesome.
Sort of disgusting as they are sometimes, like they were pretty awesome. Like, exactly, aesthetically speaking.
Well, seeing Jessica's, unborn baby being completely born like within days because she drank the water of life. Right. But of course, with Lynch's vision, you've got a whole close up of a fetus covered in blood. Like it's very disgusting. But yeah, I thought those were successful. I thought that the hand with the the cosmic rays coming out of it at the beginning, in the middle of space, it felt very Lynch, but it also felt like you were kind of going through these dreams that Paul keeps having, and that's when he saw Chani and all that, or Chaney, I guess, depending on which movie you're watching again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but there was a lot to like about the '84 one, and nostalgically, I used to watch this movie a lot as a sci-fi geek in high school and everything. So I always used to like this, but watching it this time, it was hard to get through.
Yeah. It's tough, but I would say it's the one worthy of revisiting and has its
I agree.
merits. Every few years, if you're in the mood, you might.
Well, especially when it's on TV and you can catch it at any part. You're just like, I'll watch Dune.
Yeah.
Watch some of this in between commercial breaks.
But at least, in this one, like we were saying, the costumes look like they were really lived in, like people could use them. They were functional. And then you've got the sci-fi, the Frank Herbert's Dune, and they literally look like construction paper. Like a lot of the things, like the Bene Gesserit, she had those like butterfly wings that would come out of her head, and it looked like you could just
the like fancy restaurant rice cake, servings on top of her head.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
To me, the aesthetic of the sci-fi series to me was really like, this came out a year after The Phantom Menace, and I feel like it was sort of the Naboo look.
There you go.
Right.
Just suffused
so
throughout
right,
this thing.
I could have done without any of the computer graphic work that they did in that did not hold up. It's got that PlayStation, probably Nintendo 64 look to it. It's just so bad.
I wrote in my notes Bryce 3D if anybody remembers.
Yeah.
Actually, right in the beginning, like it looked like the Trapper Keeper, the front covers of that, like the ships coming in. I mean, it's like, obviously the computer graphics at the time, for something this budget is just going to be trash. But it's like, okay, you can imagine watching a scene out of context with William Hurt, and you're like, okay, I could probably watch this movie, right? And like,
right.
It's the actual experience is a little different. Not just maybe the sometimes unintelligible accents of the Eastern European cast, but also just like how, again, even though they had 5 hours of screen time to convey all this stuff, they kept removing these contextual details that allow the audience to understand what the hell's going on. It's like when one character's talking to another character and what they say and how they react, you're totally in the dark for the first two episodes, in my opinion, for the first two episodes. I mean, like I said, in the third one, you kind of get a little more context just because of how the story's kind of wrapping up.
Now, if I remember correctly, and again, it's been since high school since I've read the book. Because I haven't been able to get through the audiobook again because I'm not going to read it again. One of the questions I had was, I always thought Duncan, Idaho had a much bigger role in these wars and these battles that they were in. I mean, he single-handedly, I believe, took out a good group of the Sardaukar at one time in like this climactic battle, or this extremely exciting battle in the book, and they just didn't touch on that. And in the miniseries one, he just gets hit with a missile and disappears for the rest of the... And I was like, I thought he was such a cooler character in the book. Maybe I was wrong. I don't know.
No, he was absolutely more involved in the book. And I think, again, one of the things that makes the book feel so different than other examples in the genre is that something like this, the characters that Frank Herbert assembles around the protagonist are kind of strange. He has Gurney Halleck, which is the sort of master-at-arms... bodyguard / battle strategist. And yet there's this other kind of man of action, Duncan Idaho, who is a little bit more of a secret agent. And yet they are a bit similar in the function that they might play in an epic like this. And so I feel like in an adaptation where there's only so much screen time, a director is going to have to make a choice. Who am I really going to focus on here?
Mm-hmm. And Gurney was closer to the family, almost of a babysitter of sorts for Paul, right? He was always around the family. He was kind of bringing him up, and so I could see why you'd choose Gurney over Duncan, especially when you've got Patrick Stewart in the role of Gurney Halleck.
Atomics.
That was a great
young pup.
You young pup.
Just like 2 years out from TNG as well. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
But I think it was a couple years after Excalibur, which is the first movie I can remember him being in that I saw.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, like as we're talking about Patrick Stewart and all this, like, man, how crazy was it when they were riding in on the sandworms at the end, storm the castle, like the music, like the metal just like kind of cranks up. And
That's when it hits hard.
And Patrick Stewart like has long hair, even though he's like bald from the eyebrows to the back of his head, but he still has long flowing hair, going super metal. It was like, all right.
I love those ropes too that they're using to hold on to the worm. I remember like doing those as jump rope ropes and like in grade school in gym class. They were like those shitty ones with the plastic things, and they're just hold on.
Yeah.
But I do have to say though, over the sci-fi version, the effects of the Lynch hold up more to me, especially the worm. Because it was a real thing, right? Again, we're talking practical versus the CG. Mm-hmm. And the puppet sells for me. The puppet really sold for me in that first scene when they're above the spice field and Leto wants to save the harvester, and that thing comes up from below, and you see how big these things actually are. And it swallows the harvester without a problem. Right. It just opens its mouth and closes. I thought that gave it the grand scale that the worms of that planet really deserved for the story. They're massive, monsters.
Yep. No, totally. And, obviously with the Dune miniseries, I mean, it's like, the budget for either practical effects, like little models, or, doing their N64, CGI, weren't there.
But the baby worm was cool. Like when they wrestled an actual baby puppet worm and had it throw up, because it's the bile, the water of life. I thought that was actually pretty interesting. It got more into it as opposed to in the Lynch one. It was just kind of in an aquarium, and they just kind of like tapped the water from that or something. I didn't even know where they got it.
You know what's crazy though? Like I feel like the Frank Herbert's Dune, the Sci-Fi Channel version, kind of had some of the casting decisions that they were making, ironically, in Starship Troopers, where it was like, the really extremely square-jawed Paul, who's obviously older than his mother, and he
looks like a Swedish pop producer.
Yeah.
He just...
Yeah, he's definitely getting out the funky
I believe
beats.
he's Scottish, but
he is Scottish.
Northern European middle-aged man.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess that brings up another thing about, we were talking about Paul earlier, and it's like, the casting of Paul is so tough because, in the book, he's what, like, 12, 13, something like that.
15 when it starts.
Oh, 15. And in these movies, maybe they're trying to have them play in their 20s or something. But, part of the plot is to have Jessica be pregnant again. And, it's just like you need to have, both for the audience's expectations, like, what's this boy going to be able to do? And, kind of have, Jessica not be younger than Paul. You kind of need to like cast a lot younger.
Yeah. And I think, to my earlier point about how irritating particularly the sci-fi Paul is, I think that the casting is a huge factor in that. It's when you have somebody who just looks, 28 and is behaving in this sort of adolescent, immature way, it is just naturally going to clang.
Right. It's very it's like it's an uncanny valley type of experience where it's like like this doesn't compute. And then you get him going into the very cold exterior Muad'Dib performance, and both these actors kind of had that problem where it's like, in the book, he's being cold on purpose to like sort of lead these very hardened how do they put it, like the desert makes you God created the desert to to make you like as hard as possible. Train the faithful. Thank you. Much more poetic than what I was going.
God made it the desert to create a hard ass.
Exactly. And like, so God made the desert to create a hard ass. He has to keep the hard ass exterior, but you see inside his thoughts in the book that he's scared about this or worried about that, and trying to accomplish this thing over here. That's always going to be a challenge, I think, in adapting this to screen. Either you'd have to kind of go the Lynch route of having the voiceover, or have the Sci-Fi Channel version where you just have no context at all. Or it's like, he has private conversations outside of like his public persona with someone he confides in, like what's her name? The
Cheney.
Dick
Cheney.
Dick Cheney.
It was of its era. That's why they made the switch from Chani to Cheney.
Cheney or Chani.
Yeah, the country was different back then.
The same reason they got rid of jihad. Yeah, exactly. But like, he like confided in Cheney that the way he felt about this or that, and like then we'd see him act differently or according. It's like be able to juxtapose those things. But that also then adds scenes, and then you're cramming a lot more into like this very, very dense story.
Well, you brought up an interesting point in comparing and contrasting the structure of these two. They're both kind of broadly sort of scene for scene faithful adaptations. The difference being, as a 2.5 hour feature, the Lynch film just cut a lot of fat, dropped quite a lot of material, but didn't really invent a whole lot. Similarly, in sci-fi, really kind of every major scene in the novel is more or less in there, but they did something quite different, which they made Princess Irulan a key part of the action throughout. And she becomes almost, in a very odd way, the kind of moral center of this thing. She's almost playing like a detective investigating what her father, the Emperor, and the Harkonnen are up to. And rather than using her as just a framing device like the Lynch adaptation, which
Virginia Madsen
takes her epigraphs for each chapter, and at least at the beginning, gives her that moment.
Right.
They could have done this, I think, in the sci-fi adaptation to keep you oriented. Instead, they make her sort of a key figure and invent this whole storyline that may have been happening off screen or
Right.
in your imagination throughout the novel, but is absolutely not something that we spend considerable time following.
But that was how we found out that, the Emperor was working directly with the Harkonnen, and Fade was part of that, and Raban was already there, about to cause terror and an invasion and all that. And yeah, I guess that's an interesting way to look at it.
That's true, and it actually it takes the screen time that we would have normally had to take if you're adapting it just page for page from the book, the screen time of the Fade character, and his machinations, they kind of cut all that out of the sci-fi version. So in the book, Fade, is trying to kill his uncle and try to take over, and he's always scheming and doing crazy stuff. He sets up a whole gladiator match to seem like he's going to lose, and then he triumphantly wins and wins over the crowd, and is trying to draw up support for himself in that manner. And they touch on that a little bit in the sci-fi Dune, but they ultimately you're right, Danny, they switched it to be more about the Princess Irulan, and then have her explain some of this stuff. And I think as a choice that is a kind of a good one, and because Paul and Irulan met, I think in one of the first maybe it was part 1, they had the scene that I don't think was in the book, but they were talking to one another, kind of meeting and seemingly having a romantic interest with one another. And what's funny, it's as a scene, I remember thinking oh man, this is the first time we've had a scene that is starting to make sense between what the two characters are doing, talking to one another. You know what I mean? It's you as the audience are clued into what's going on. And in terms of changes to the source material to adapt it to screen, I think that is a good one. Making her more of a character, making her more of a sort of a moral center, and trying to understand unpack this mystery. And if you're going to do that, you need a little more of her, what she's trying to accomplish by doing all this stuff. With the Fade story in the book, you understand what he's trying to do by doing all this crazy stuff, of trying to assassinate his uncle, and doing the whole fake out in the ring, where he's trying to get the people of the Empire on his side. The same way you understand his motivations in the book, you need to understand Irulan's motivations back on Earth, or wherever the hell it's taking place with the Emperor. But I think as a story device, it worked really well, or it could have worked really well. I don't know that they achieved that in this one, but in theory, it was a really good way to like you said, Daniel, have the audience kind of clued in on some of the political machinations of what the Emperor and the Baron and all these people were doing. And then on top of that, have her be that sort of voice of or the perspective of the audience of trying to figure this out, also being the moral center of it. And especially where she kind of comes in the book is, more or less out of nowhere. We've seen her interstitials throughout the whole book. You didn't know what they are. And then you see her we're joining the houses or whatever. And we're going to, create peace with this thing, and keep the spice flowing or whatever. But if they had done this thing a little more successfully that they were setting out to do in the Sci-Fi Channel version, of having her become this character that you're following and unraveling some of these mysteries, then when they have the sort of union at the end there, it would feel more satisfying as a story as a whole. Which I guess technically that it is what happens on screen, but you're so lost most of the time, having that frame of what's going on in Arrakis, what's going on in the bigger empire, having that ending then work with that final confrontation there, and having a character kind of take you through that's not the Emperor is pretty important. It's interesting that they didn't get it to really work in this miniseries. And what is it? Is it that a lot of times you kind of, as the audience, are in the dark as to what they're talking about? I mean, it's they're discussing all these politics that aren't very clear. Is that what's kind of keeping, what makes that story so unsatisfying is what I'm asking. What I'm saying?
In the miniseries, you mean?
In the miniseries of because in theory, that character and that exploration and being that audience surrogate should be interesting and should be working. But
how does it resolve? we find out what's going on, but she doesn't really achieve anything from it.
What is she trying to achieve? Yeah, exactly. We don't know that. Yeah, that's true.
Actually, that's a better word. I said originally moral center. I may reconsider that, but audience surrogate, I think. She's sort of the character as camera to get you shortcutted to some information that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Yeah, and I think the reason it struggles is because there's really nothing endangering her. She's not at risk really at any moment. Of course, she goes to Gidi Prime, which is sort of a hornet's nest, but you never get the sense that the Harkonnen may kidnap her or inflict sort of their schemes on her. She just is sort of a way to transport you, much like in a film that we complain about, Sicario, where that sort of final scene that the protagonist becomes really just a camera for the audience to join Benicio del Toro in his hit. This is sort of a similar function, and hard to really invest in the character, besides everything else keeping you out, like the stilted writing and acting, and sets. That's another thing that really worth talking about. The
sets and costumes.
The Kaitane sets were incredible. There's scenes where, particularly in static shots, you can kind of look through the windows and just see the sort of high school play painted types back there that look like the illustrations from that children's book Madeline. They just.
Were you guys able to listen to the commentary on this?
Oh man, no, that was one and done.
The file that you put up there, Jeremy, I was trying to watch it on my computer and on my TV, and for some reason the audio track of John Harrison, the director, came on. And so he was talking about that, and he said, yeah, instead of using green screen, we just used a bunch of basically big billboards behind people, wrapped over big walls, and that played a little bit better. And I was like, maybe then, but wow, it's not working now.
Yeah,
it's funny because the some of the costumes were so outrageous that they were really distracting. I mean, the
Harkonnen especially.
I mean, some of the costumes would make Prince blush.
You're mocking me.
No, I'm trying to interest you.
Part of it is, as outrageous as the costumes were in the Lynch version, you have enough sort of budget to make it detailed enough and, kind of creepy looking enough to kind of pull off the otherworldliness. I think with this one, with things like the mocap jumpsuits and the paper triangles and all that other stuff, it's like there's only so much you can do to kind of dress that up without having the sort of budget to back it up. You know what I mean? It's like, and if that's the case, then you got to kind of scale back the sort of outrageousness because it's like so distracting that you're all of a sudden like not listening to what they're saying, even though it's like hard to listen to what they say sometimes.
There were a lot of times that I would just kind of blind myself and listen because you kind of had to, you just had to hear what they were saying, especially when it went into the Baron.
No, he was very, very theater student. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
No, you're right. There were those moments that you have to wonder, perhaps the most distracting throwaway moments in the entire series were around Muad'Dib itself, not Paul, but the mouse.
Yeah.
The namesake mouse. It was like sort of, a half-assed stop-motion puppet.
Yeah.
That looked like just felt from a Michaels that somebody stitched
It was
together.
really, really bad. And I feel like it was enough to say that the shadow mouse or the mouse shadow of the moon was enough because that was Muad'Dib, right? Was that the way that the moon looked? And I thought that was enough. And I thought they did enough in Lynch's movie to say, that's what we call it. This is your name. And I was like, that's fine. That's all we need. We didn't need to see like him kind of sitting there, like, playing with his Paul's little sister and all that. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. And it would just kind of come up and like make really weird moves and run away. Jesus. Bad puppet. But that miniseries did win Emmys for special effects, outstanding special effects and outstanding cinematography.
Wow.
In 2001. So
It really
maybe we're wrong.
Really values the Emmy.
What do we know? We're just a bunch of idiots.
Yeah, exactly.
It was also, I think, a ratings winner as well. It did well.
Yeah, it killed it. Yeah.
Basic cable. It also occupies a kind of interesting moment, a sort of transition moment in television itself. This sort of like onset of prestige TV was right around the corner.
Just-
We're in the
yeah.
midst of it with The Sopranos and soon, The Wire, which, maybe wasn't as popular as it was in its later years.
But also Sex and the City. It's like it is that it's that time. Yeah, exactly.
And yet this still feels very much like a product of, bygone eras of television.
Right.
Except for the nudity, which did surprise me.
Right.
Was that on the Sci-Fi Channel at the time?
That's what I was asking. I was like, wait, did I see that right? Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah.
It
And it
was
happens
very
twice.
jarring, because
Yeah.
it does have a very kind of, safe aesthetic. It's
Right.
family friendly despite the adult themes and violence, but there's nothing really risky in it until
Right.
really that moment.
I guess the kid running away with Raban's head at the end was pretty awesome, but even that was, pretty tame by the other standards.
So that's another. They really tamed down. It's still in there, but the sort of homophobia, I think, was tamed down a bit, and it's something that's like, of course, awkward in the novel, and then also awkward in Lynch's Dune. But this sort of like added dimension of the Harkonnens, their homosexuality, and then preying on young boys is really
Right.
played up as a grotesque thing.
In the book, you're saying.
In the book, and then even in the Lynch. Version, and
That's that's true with his like heart plug and all this stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Oh God.
right, and people, this didn't occur to me, but just in reading things, people have pointed out sort of this was the height of the AIDS pandemic, right, and so to have
In Lynch's
this character, in '84, right, to have this character with boils on his face, and it just really plays into some kind of awful stereotypes.
Right.
And in the Sci-Fi Channel version, it's still there, but they're more sort of like simpering twinks that serve
Yeah.
the Harkonnens. They're
Right.
not,
Right.
sort of torture boys as they are in the Lynch,
Right.
Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this other than interesting and dark, and certainly something that there are a few things that I'm kind of fascinated to see in the Villeneuve adaptation. How are they going to play this in 2021 America, where there are just some things that are probably ill-advised for audiences now, and certainly the discourse, that being one of them. Again, the sort of switcheroo, crusade, jihad,
Right.
and I'm sure I could come up with more, but
Well, I would like to get into what we already know about the Villeneuve, and we've got a trailer and we've got casting information. That's about it. But I mean, from what I've seen so far, to be totally honest, it doesn't look much different than Lynch's film in many ways. I feel like the aesthetic is very similar. The still suits are very similar, which again, that's how I thought they looked from the writing. So maybe that's why. But I don't feel like it's. I'm not sure, and I can't really judge based on a trailer. But I don't know what it's going to push new that we already haven't seen.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I was pretty disappointed in the trailer. It seems like the conceit behind this adaptation is like, oh, we could do this better. Technology's improved a little bit.
Right.
We'll invest a little bit more. We'll hire a director we trust, and we'll just make a very competent, straightforward adaptation of this thing. And we'll finally achieve the level of production value and sort of satisfaction that we've always wanted with Dune. And we're not going to, pursue any of the kind of transcendent things that other directors had, sort of the hubris to attempt in their version.
Yeah.
And that's kind of disappointing, I mean, just the fact that we've waited 55 years to adapt this film, not for the subject matter, but for the visual aesthetic.
Yeah, and Pink Floyd finally making an appearance in Dune, right?
Oh, really? Wait,
and that's something. Well, so the trailer that dropped a couple months ago has the track from Dark Side of the Moon in it, and it was really,
I did hear that. Yeah,
really jarring at the time. I was like, what is this doing in here? This is so cheese. Cringe. They're posting cringe. But when I saw it, I had no idea that Jodorowsky intended Pink Floyd to score the original. So now it takes on a new dimension. But I wonder, probably just something they licensed for the trailer, and they're not actually going to have Dark Side tracks.
Right, exactly.
That'd be wild.
It's Hans Zimmer scored. as we know.
There you go. Okay. But, like the people that we've seen, I mean, I do think Timothée Chalamet looks more like a Paul, in my opinion. He looks very much younger than, at least their first two Pauls.
Right.
He certainly can span the teen to sort of young man spectrum better than either of our two leads.
Mm-hmm. But how much time does pass between when Jessica and Paul leave Arrakeen and then they land in the Sietch in the deep desert? Is that... That's years that go by?
Yeah, 2 years, I think.
2 years, okay. Because, I mean, a lot happens in that period, especially, like we were saying in the Lynch film, when all of a sudden you just hold the fast-forward button the second they get in that plane, or that thopter, and then they're on their way.
Right.
Oh, that was another thing that was really interesting about the animated storyboards in Jodorowsky's Dune. It's like
very cool,
They had
by the way.
They had the, like, sort of dragonfly-winged... ornithopters.
That's how they are in the book, aren't they?
which-
Like
yeah.
they're like insects, right? Like, or they operate like animals and insects, things that actually fly.
Yeah.
Like I thought that was cool.
It is, and it's one of those kind of it's something that adds mystique to the book, right? He's describing these ornithopters, and they're cool in the sense that they're kind of fresh. They're not cool the way that like a sleek, typical sci-fi vehicle would be cool,
technology,
right?
yeah,
Like
exactly.
the toy that they make out of it would be something that
Right.
perhaps doesn't appeal to kids.
Yeah. Well, that is the interesting thing about the sort of Dune world of, like, it's not just straight, we've advanced in technology and now we can do these things. It's like there's advanced technology, but there's also this sort of, like, organic magic
Right.
that sort of, fuses into that world.
Because we left out, we didn't talk about, and none of the adaptations talk about, one of the crucial pieces of backstory to this whole thing, which is that computers have been obliterated from society.
Yes.
They
Which
have
is why we have the
interstellar-
Mentat now.
Exactly. They have interstellar travel and all of this sort of like
Right,
steampunk implementation of
With no
technology.
AI.
No computers. And
Yeah.
the brain, the sort of parapsychic experience has replaced the computer as the sort of higher order of computation that powers the universe. And it is very interesting that sort of as sci-fi, sci-fi as a genre is sort of like about how technology intervenes and mediates society and culture. Like this aspect, this absolutely foundational piece,
Yeah.
is
Right.
just not on the surface, or even the subtext. Maybe subtext because you don't really see computers, but
It's never said in the text, in the overt text. That's for sure, especially in any of these movies. And I was waiting for it in the Frank Herbert, the sci-fi version. I figured they'd at least have something, like
They certainly had the
Thufir
time to
or
go into
something.
that, but yeah.
Well, right. what would that have been more than Thufir kind of sitting down with Paul and just giving him a little spiel about what happened back in the day, as to why mentats are now so important,
Right, exactly. Which would have also given context to what mentats are supposed to be, and the whole
Except
Bene
the
Gesserits
Lynchian-
and all this stuff. Like,
The guys that ate too many red pistachios and with the huge eyebrows.
exactly.
But I did love Brad Dourif. Piter when he's like sitting there and he keeps doing these like motions as he's talking, with his hands. It's like really odd, but you could tell that was Dourif just kind of pulling shit out because he's such a crazy actor.
Yeah,
totally.
it's a joy to watch.
He is.
But yeah, I think just in terms of adaptation, I think we kind of nail a lot of this stuff down. But it's like, in terms of the new Dune movie, or the ones that either have been realized or were never realized, I think it's just like it's such the stuff that makes Dune so interesting, both the character interaction that is fully explored, and then like the incredible world that Herbert built, where, like you're saying, Danny, like the foundational, like, millennia old piece that is like taken for granted is that there are no computers. And so therefore, like, all this other stuff that we talk about with like technology and like, space travel and like whatever, all has to be done through this other means of like, sort of like this magic and whatever else. And then the world that ends up kind of creating. And again, like with a lot of future projections of sci-fi, there is sort of this dystopian outlook on it, because it's regressed into these like feudal systems of like
it's medieval
battling empires, and exactly, like different fiefdoms and whatever.
Yeah.
But there's something like very interesting about like, you know, the book was what, written in the late 60s or at least
65.
published. Yeah. And like there's this idea of like, I know Danny, you and I had talked about this a couple of times, and my question was always like, why was it that there was this like explosion of interesting sci-fi that kind of came out of that late 50s through the 60s and early 70s, like the Philip K. Dicks and, you know, the Isaac Asimovs and Harlan Elsons and Frank Herbert and, you know, you name it, right? And I wonder if part of it is that there was, you know, culturally speaking, this look forward and an imagining of sort of new worlds, imagining of, I don't know, life that didn't exist yet. But then culturally, when we got to the 80s, the whole idea was to reject everything that had happened in the sort of late 60s, early 70s of like the reimagining society and whatever else. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that like in that time, everything retreated to the 50s or whatever. And then, you know, so everything sort of, the gaze turned from away from the future and, you know, back into the past. And like, I wonder if part of that like had an effect on like sci-fi in terms of like the imagination of what the future could hold. Because, you know, didn't everything kind of come after that, like turn into like the future is a dystopian hellscape always. And like, you can't imagine a future without it being horrible. In either subtle ways or, you know, really overt ways.
Yeah.
Now, I guess I would argue that Dune, where we start off, is very much a hell world. But where at least the first book ends and where you kind of imagine the series seems to be, you know, headed, is that it's transforming that world into something better. But it's just, I wonder like if there's something... you know, to that, and sort of how, again, Jodorowsky was trying to express those things and sort of move the ball forward. You know, if culture had kind of like, you know, kept going in that direction, if the sci-fi would have also been better.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have some half-baked thoughts on that, which may be sort of the...
Believe me, that theory is very half-baked. It's like not backed up with necessarily much research or whatever else.
Oh, of course. Well, you know, we've all have PhDs hanging behind us. We've written our dissertations on sci-fi.
It was just like a thought that was like kind of occurring to me while I was watching the Jodorowsky documentary. But anyways, sorry, go ahead.
Sure, no, but I think in broad strokes, you know, 65, we're on our way to the crisis of the 70s, right?
Yeah.
The moment in which we reach stagflation.
The theory that shouldn't have ever existed. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So as sort of the economy stalled out and the crisis of stagflation set in, we had things like New York City going bankrupt, this sort of, you know, so-called capital of the Western world, whatever you want to call it. This once, you know, sort of optimistic metropolis degrading into dispossessed kind of, you know, bombed out dystopian scape where city services had vacated large swaths of the city and people were squatting, and, you know, that sort of experience led to what we saw in the 80s, and combine that with the looming sort of threat of nuclear war and the Cold War as an umbrella over all of it.
That's true.
You had this sort of turn towards that sort of dark vision because it had nowhere to turn, because the experience of everybody at the time was turning in that direction along with it, right?
Yeah, you're right. I think the nuclear like scares totally had to play into that too. It's like you think about what's it called, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? And the fact that everyone understood that for that 2-week period, the world was on the brink of it coming into an end. Human life was coming to an end, on the brink of coming to an end. So it was like, you know, that makes everyone in the popular imagination, you know, wrestle with that mortality and like the idea of like extinction in a really sort of, you know, brutal and gut level way. And you're probably right. That probably has a lot to do with sort of the dystopian vision as well.
Yeah. There's I was reading a sort of short essay, I think in The Guardian. I'll send the link if you guys want to post it.
Yeah.
But the writer Hari Kunzru, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, sort of sets up this interesting, if reductive, kind of spectrum where you have the Lord of the Rings published in 1954, kind of referencing the rise of fascism and the horror of the Second World War, and particularly the first, because Tolkien fought in that war.
Right. Experience that.
And then you have Dune in this sort of, broadly prosperous period in the West. And then by the 80s into the 90s, the sort of seminal work we hit then is Game of Thrones, which is this kind of neoliberal, atomized, precarious, hellish world where everybody is this like individual operator kind of making their way in a very sort of cynical, hopeless.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to describe that world. Is like very cynical. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so he of course lays it out far better than I did just now, but it is an interesting kind of generalization to think about where this sits in the overall evolution of sci-fi over the last 50 years.
Yeah, and just like the imagination, I guess it's part of it too. It's like, we'll often be surprised of like, okay, in this book or that book, or in the William Gibson book, they're sort of predicting iPhones and all this other kind of stuff. And you just wonder, like, like for me, that the question sort of like started with like, okay, well, why was it that this period of time had such interesting, future-looking, futurists and people like writing sci-fi and projecting out that vision on the world, and now it feels like it's either a retread of that information, with different character names or whatever, or something else.
Did any writers around that time fly so far into the future, though, as Herbert did? I mean, he went 8,000 years, right? I mean, because that is AD, right, that they're talking about, 10,191. Yeah. So, I mean, has anyone ever gone that far into the future just to see it?
Maybe Asimov and the Foundation series.
Right, that's right, Foundation.
Yeah. But I can't remember if it's implicitly pegged to Earth as a source, whereas I feel like Dune is, or it is. I mean, there's words that they use that I think they call sort of like the ancient terms that are words we have, and I can't remember what they are, but it's pretty clear that like our society is the evolved or devolved version of it.
But I think that, like, that part of it too is part of what makes sci-fi in general, but also the Herbert work in particular so fascinating, is that sort of vision of things, and like and just again to like harp on the no computer thing. It is so interesting, something that like you just wonder like if that's going to be addressed at all in any adaptation. It seems like one would need to kind of get into the heart of the themes and all these other things that are happening.
Right. Particularly for audiences today who all have a computer.
Yes,
exactly. We have a computer in our back pocket at all times, right? So how do you explain? I mean, there is suspension of disbelief, and you can expect people will just go with it. I think there's enough kind of like sort of spiritual magic in this story to get you there if you want to, but it is worth exploring.
I mean, this is space travel through strange consciousness via drug abuse, right? Like
tripping balls to get
right. Yeah, let's call it what it is.
Tripping some spice, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is, I know we're running pretty long here, but I think it's definitely an interesting exploration, and maybe we'll have to talk some other time about like how it kind of connected to Star Wars and stuff too. I thought like
right. I mean, we didn't even mention David Lynch originally offered Return of the Jedi, right?
Yeah,
that's wild. God, that'd have been a wildly different movie.
Well, and you think about it, like the worm thing, the beast that'll digest you over 1,000 years or whatever.
The Sarlacc.
The Sarlacc, yeah, exactly. The Sarlacc with the little phalanges on its throat is exactly what is realized in Lynch's Dune.
All right. Well, we think we should probably be wrapping up. Are there any other last points that we should bring up before we cut out?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered this one. What do we got? An hour 45 here?
Yeah,
we got a $1.45.
All right. Well, then next week we have another special guest on who Chris Michael, a good friend of ours, programmed a block of cyberpunk films. Jeremy thought it was a good idea that we should focus probably on adaptations of Philip K. Dick stories, novels, short stories, etc. And so we're going to be watching Blade Runner from 1982, Total Recall from 1990, and Minority Report from 2002.
Yeah, it'll be pretty fun. I those are my favorite Philip K. Dick adaptations thus far, and so it'll be definitely a contrast from this episode where everything is super painful to watch the movies that are really fun. And besides, I've seen Total Recall probably like 4 times in the past year, so
why not 5?
Got
then,
that one memorized. Yeah, exactly.
There's not enough times to watch Total Recall.
Right.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on Dune, adapting the unadaptable, if you will. If you have any closing comments or anything, now's the time.
Thank you. My hope is that anyone who listens to this and puts themselves through the gum jobber-like experience of watching, particularly all 3 episodes of the Sci-Fi Channel, and comes out of it like I did, never wanting to see or hear anything else about Dune ever again, is inspired for the forthcoming Denis Villeneuve adaptation, which I'm now looking forward to after this conversation. So
that's true.
Thank you both.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I have to say, like, I wasn't super excited about another adaptation of Dune, but yeah, after going through this exercise, I'm definitely interested to see where it was taken. I
agree. I'm actually looking forward to that film. Yeah.
But yeah, and thanks a lot, Danny. It was great chatting with you, and this is like such a perfect one to, like I said, to bring you on. I had a great insight, despite the fact that you had a self-deprecating intro about not having that. I think you proved yourself wrong.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, and thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms of the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
Ciao.
We Fremen have a saying. God created Arrakis to train the faithful. One cannot go against the word of God.